Imagine showing up to a cafe with no money and still expecting service. Some people really have no shame. One man sneered loudly as the others chuckled. He stood at the counter, soaked from the rain, trembling and humiliated. His voice cracked as he murmured, "I just wanted to stay dry, just for a moment." The barista rolled his eyes. The laughter around him grew louder. Then she stepped forward. The waitress, no hesitation, just quiet strength. She reached into her pocket, placed a crumpled $5 bill on the counter and said, "His coffee's on me." What she didn't know? That man was a billionaire, searching for something money had never bought him: true kindness. The rain had started sometime before dawn, and by 7 p.m. it was relentless, drumming steadily against the cafe windows like a quiet warning. Inside Common Ground Cafe, the air was thick with the scent of roasted beans and old wood, a warmth that contrasted sharply with the chill that clung to Grace Martin's bones. She stood behind the counter, brushing a damp strand of auburn hair behind her ear. Her uniform was slightly faded, her eyes ringed with the soft bruise of too little sleep. For Grace, this was job number 2 of the day, after caring for her chronically ill younger brother Eli all night. The morning rush was just beginning: clattering cups, steam hissing from the espresso machine, and the low hum of half-awake conversations. The door swung open with a gust of wind and rain, setting the overhead chimes jangling. A man stepped inside, older, soaked to the bone, his gray hair matted to his forehead and his shoulders hunched from more than just the weather. He moved with hesitation, pausing at the entrance as if unsure he belonged. His coat dripped steadily onto the tile, and his shoes left faint muddy prints behind him. Quietly, he approached the counter where Grace's co-worker, Darren, stood. "I'll just have a black coffee, please," the man said, voice hoarse, eyes avoiding everyone else's. Darren barely looked up. "That'll be $2.75, he said. The man reached into his pocket, then his other one. Panic flickered in his eyes as he searched again. Empty. He patted his coat, turned out his wallet, then swallowed hard. I must have left my wallet." "I'm sorry," he murmured, embarrassed. "I didn't mean to. Maybe I could just sit until the rain lets up?" Darren snorted and crossed his arms. "This isn't a shelter," he said loud enough for everyone to hear. "If you don't have money, you can't sit here." A man seated nearby laughed. "Imagine showing up to a cafe with no money and still expecting service. Some people really have no shame." Another joined in with a cruel smirk. "Maybe he thought he'd get sympathy with that soggy coat." The old man flinched. His hand dropped from his pocket. For a moment he stood frozen, shoulders hunched, soaked and shivering, the weight of humiliation settling over him like lead. He turned, ready to walk back into the storm. Grace had seen enough. She moved before her thoughts could catch up to her body. From her apron, she pulled out a wrinkled $5 bill, her last. She stepped to the register and slapped it down. "His coffee's paid for," she said, voice calm but cutting through the snickers like a blade. Darren opened his mouth, but Grace turned away from him and toward the man. "Please," she said gently, "sit by the window. I'll bring it to you." The moment passed, but the silence that followed was deafening. Grace returned to the counter as the old man settled at the window, hands trembling slightly around the warm ceramic mug she'd handed him. But the air in Common Ground Cafe had shifted. The same customers who had chuckled now watched her with raised eyebrows, some shaking their heads. The hum of conversation resumed, quieter this time, tinged with curiosity and thinly veiled judgment. Darren, still fuming, leaned toward her. "You really think that was smart?" he muttered under his breath. "He's not your charity case, Grace." "I didn't say he was," she replied evenly, wiping down the counter. "But I wasn't going to watch you humiliate someone who just needed a seat and a hot drink." He scoffed and walked off. It wasn't long before Mr. Randall, the manager, emerged from the back office, clipboard in hand and irritation already plastered across his face. "Grace," he called, gesturing her over with a sharp flick of his wrist. "Office, now." Inside the cramped room that smelled like old receipts and stronger coffee than the front ever served, he closed the door behind her with a sigh. "This is a business, not your personal rescue mission," he said flatly. Grace didn't answer right away. She stared at the faded inspirational poster behind him that read, Teamwork makes the dream work, its edges curling from the steam. I paid for it myself, she said quietly. It didn't cost the cafe anything. That's not the point. Randall set the clipboard down and leaned forward. You embarrassed your coworker. You made customers uncomfortable. You turned a standard morning into a spectacle. Grace met his eyes. I didn't make it a spectacle. The laughter and cruelty did. He tapped his pen against the desk. You don't get to make judgment calls on who deserves what in here. Your job is to serve, nothing more. A long pause settled between them. Then Grace said, voice calm but unwavering, I'd rather be mocked for doing the right thing than praised for staying silent. Randall leaned back slowly, as if assessing whether this was insubordination or just another lost cause. I'm not going to fire you, he said, but this isn't a place for saints, Grace. Keep your halo at home. When she walked back into the kitchen, her co-workers fell quiet. Marcy glanced at her from the dish sink and muttered, must be nice playing hero. Bet she thinks he's secretly a millionaire. Another Josh smirked. Yeah, coffee Cinderella. Maybe he'll come back with a limo. Grace didn't respond. She hung up her apron hook side out, tied it again, and returned to the floor. What they didn't understand was that she wasn't expecting anything back. Not money, not recognition, not even respect. Because when she looked at the man by the window, she didn't see poverty or weakness. She saw someone who had once been strong, now caught in a quiet storm. And if no one else was going to throw him a lifeline, she would, even if it cost her more than $5. 3 days had passed since the rainy morning that changed everything. Grace had almost convinced herself the moment was over, that it would fade like so many others in her life. A kindness given without expectation, left behind like a paper cup on a rainy sidewalk. But that Thursday morning, the bell above the cafe door jingled, and the air inside shifted. Grace looked up mid-pour, hand pausing on the coffee pot. The man who stepped in wasn't the same figure she'd paid for days ago. His coat was no longer soaked or tattered. His salt and pepper hair was neatly combed, his shirt crisp beneath a dark tailored suit. He walked with quiet confidence, not arrogance, like someone who'd been powerful long before anyone noticed. Conversation stuttered into silence. Darren blinked. Marcy's eyes widened. Josh muttered something under his breath. Grace stood frozen behind the counter. The man said nothing to anyone. He simply walked across the cafe and sat down, at the same window seat as before, the one where he had once clutched a cup like it was the last warmth left in his world. She wiped her hands, steadied her breath, and approached. Before she could speak, he looked up. Why did you help me, he asked softly, when you didn't know who I was? The question landed gently but carried weight. Grace sat across from him, heart thudding like an echo against her ribs. I didn't think it mattered who you were, she replied. He tilted his head slightly, watching her. She looked out the window as the rain, gentler this time, slid down the glass. When I was 12, she said quietly, my mom collapsed at a flea market. Heat stroke. She fell between two fruit stands. People just kept walking, stepped over her, looked past her like she wasn't even there. The man's expression didn't change, but something softened in his eyes. One woman stopped, Grace continued, didn't say a word, just knelt down, gave us water, wrapped me in her scarf. That scarf smelled like mint and soap. I never forgot it. The man nodded slowly. I guess that stayed with me, she said, her voice tightening. And when I saw you that day, you didn't look like someone begging. You looked like someone breaking. Silence settled between them, not awkward, but reverent. He leaned back slightly. Most people saw someone pathetic. Grace gave a small shrug. Then most people forgot what being human means. He smiled faintly. You don't ask for much, do you? She shook her head. I don't have room to. And yet, he murmured, you gave anyway. She met his gaze. Because someone once gave to me. There was something unspoken in that moment, a current, quiet but strong, that pulled them out of the noise around them and into a space where connection lived. Neither of them knew what would come next, but both of them felt it. Something had shifted, not just in circumstance, but in soul. And this time, when the man looked out the window, He didn't see the rain as something to escape. He saw it as a beginning. The cafe buzzed faintly around them. Cups clinked, steam hissed, and soft jazz played through the ceiling speakers. But at their corner table, time seemed to slow. Grace noticed it first. The way the man, still unnamed, studied her not with curiosity, but something deeper. Respect. Almost reverence. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket and pulled out a slim leather wallet. From it, he retrieved a simple, cream-colored business card and slid it across the table toward her. She hesitated, then picked it up. Henry Blake, founder and chairman. Blake & Co. Ventures. Her fingers froze. Her eyes flicked back to him. Wait, you're the Henry Blake? She whispered. As in, towers in 5 cities, clean water projects in Kenya, Blake Center for Innovation? He nodded once, unpretentious. That's me. Grace stared at him, her mouth slightly open. A rush of confusion swirled inside her. Admiration, shock, and something sour. So, she said slowly, you're a billionaire. Yes. And that morning, her voice caught, you came in here dressed like a man with nothing. Why? Henry didn't flinch. Because I needed to see something I couldn't buy. Grace narrowed her eyes. What does that mean? He folded his hands gently on the table. After my wife passed, I stopped trusting people. I built a life where everyone smiled when I entered a room, but only because I could sign their checks. I started wondering if everything around me was earned or bought. He paused. So I started traveling, incognito. Different cities, no entourage, no titles. Just me, observing, waiting. For what? For someone to remind me that decency doesn't come with a price tag. Grace's chest tightened. The storm of thoughts crashed all at once. So I was a test, she said flatly. Henry looked her in the eye, steady and sincere. No, you were a reminder. Her lip twitched slightly, almost a scoff, but more disbelief than derision. Feels like a test. I never asked for anything, he said gently. I didn't set you up. I didn't prompt your kindness. I just existed. You made the choice. Grace looked down at the card again, her fingers trembling slightly. He leaned forward. You saw a man drowning, he said softly, and you didn't ask if he was worth saving. You just threw a rope. She didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly, you could have just asked me if people like me still exist. Henry's smile was wistful. I think I needed to see it. The tension between them lingered. Not angry, but raw. Human. Grace slid the card back toward him. You didn't have to be a billionaire to matter to me. I know, he said. That's what makes you matter to me. And in that moment, the truth wasn't heavy. It was real. The air between them softened. Not quite calm, but clearer, like the silence after a storm. Grace folded her hands in her lap, still unsure if she was processing shock or simply trying to breathe again. Across from her, Henry, no longer just the man at the window, no longer just the billionaire, sat with a gentleness that defied every assumption she'd ever held about people like him. He glanced around the cafe, then back at her. I'm leaving town in the morning, he said, voice quiet but certain. Grace blinked, unsure what that had to do with her. I go to Tokyo every spring, he continued. Not for business, for perspective. There's a small foundation I support there. Orphanage, community housing, it grounds me. He paused. I'd like you to come with me. Grace's brow furrowed. Come with you, he nodded. Just for a few days. No obligations, no expectations. Not as a guest, not as an employee. Just as someone who reminded me what decency looks like. She stared at him, caught between disbelief and something stranger. Longing. I can't just drop everything, she said. I have my shifts. Rent? My brother. Of course, he said. And I'm not asking you to change your life. I'm inviting you to step outside it. For a breath. She leaned back in her chair. The offer sounded absurd, almost surreal. She had never been on a plane, never had a passport. She barely had enough money for groceries next week. And yet, something in his eyes made her hesitate. Not persuasion, not manipulation, just truth. Quiet, human truth. She imagined the rain on another side of the world, a quiet place where no one knew her name, a moment to exhale. Still, practicality screamed. I can't afford to take time off, she murmured. Henry reached into his pocket, pulled out a small folded paper, and slid it across the table. A printed itinerary, a plane ticket, her name already typed at the top. Her fingers brushed the edge of it. I booked it yesterday, he said. I hoped maybe you'd say yes. Grace stared at the ticket like it was in another language. Why me? She asked finally. There are thousands of people who do more, give more, deserve more. Why this for me? Henry didn't hesitate. Because you didn't ask for anything. And people like that rarely get offered anything. She sat there, heart pounding, the noise of the cafe distant, like she'd slipped into a different layer of the world. A few days, no promises, just presence. She thought of Eli, of peeling wallpaper, of unpaid bills and unanswered questions. But she also thought of a life where kindness didn't have to be a whisper. Grace looked up. 3 days, she said. That's all I can promise. Henry smiled. That's more than enough. And just like that, a door she never knew existed creaked open, not toward escape, but toward possibility. The plane touched down in Tokyo just before sunrise. As the city stretched awake beneath a misty golden sky, Grace pressed her forehead gently against the window. It still didn't feel real. Henry had said the trip wouldn't be lavish, and he was true to his word. No private jets, no five-star excess, just 2 people and a quiet itinerary scrawled in a leather-bound notebook. Their first stop was a small neighborhood shelter tucked between a train station and a noodle shop. Grace expected something clinical and cold, but instead, it felt like walking into a giant hug. Children raced to greet Henry, calling him Oji-san, their faces lighting up as he ruffled their hair and asked about school projects, birthdays, and favorite cartoons. They know you, Grace whispered as they walked through a hallway lined with crayon art. I remember them, he replied. That was what struck her. Henry didn't just fund places. He showed up. He didn't arrive with cameras or promises. He arrived with time. Over the next 3 days, Grace saw a world that lived beneath the ones she knew. Community gardens in alleyways, recovery homes tucked behind shrines, food pantries where Henry served tea and spoke with the staff like old friends. She helped fold blankets, wash dishes, read picture books in broken Japanese with the children. And in every place they went, she felt something melt. Not all at once, but like ice in sunlight. She'd expected to feel out of place. But strangely, she didn't, because it wasn't about how much she had. It was about how much she saw. One evening, they sat on the edge of a rooftop garden overlooking the city. Paper lanterns swayed gently in the breeze. Below them, laughter floated up from the courtyard where children chased bubbles under the soft glow of string lights. Grace hugged her knees to her chest. This isn't what I thought giving looked like, she murmured. Henry turned to her. What did you think it looked like? Checks, speeches, press releases. She smiled. Not this, he chuckled. I used to think that too. She glanced at him. Why don't you ever tell people who you are? He looked out over the city. Because when they know, they stop talking to me like I'm real. They either want something or put me on a pedestal I never asked for. Grace was quiet for a long moment. Then, and me? He smiled gently. You just brought me coffee. They sat there in the warm silence of Tokyo twilight, and Grace realized something profound. Henry wasn't trying to impress her, and she wasn't trying to prove anything to him. They were just there, present, seen. And for the first time in years, Grace felt what she hadn't known she was starving for. Belonging, not to wealth, not to grandeur, but to a moment where kindness spoke louder than titles, and hearts were the only thing measured. Their final morning in Tokyo arrived with a gentle drizzle, the kind that painted the streets silver and made the city feel like it was holding its breath. Grace and Henry sat across from each other in a quiet tea house nestled beneath a maple tree, its leaves trembling in the breeze. Henry slid a simple manila folder across the table. No fancy seals, no flourishes. Just her name handwritten in the corner. Grace blinked. What's this? He met her eyes. I spoke to my legal team last night. Everything's ready. It's a foundation in your name." She didn't open it, not yet. "The Grace Martin Foundation," he said gently, "focused on micro grants, community centers, resources for women and caregivers. You'll have full control, and the funding is taken care of." Grace stared at the folder, heartbeat stuttering. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. "You don't have to say anything," he replied. "Just do what you've already been doing, on a larger scale." Silence stretched between them. The rain tapped the roof rhythmically. Then Grace slowly, deliberately, pushed the folder back toward him. Henry's brows lifted slightly, not insulted, just surprised. "If I'm going to build something," she said, voice steady, "I want to do it from the ground up." He waited, listening, not to argue, but to understand. "I don't want a foundation because I impressed a billionaire," she continued. "I want something real, something I chose, not something I was given because I was seen." Henry's gaze softened. "I don't mean to sound ungrateful," she said quickly. "It's an incredible gesture, truly, but I want to believe I can do this because I choose to show up, not because someone with money handed me a legacy." Henry leaned back in his chair, thoughtful. Then slowly, a smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. Not the smile of a man who'd been rejected, but of one who'd just seen proof that he had chosen the right person. "That's what I hoped you'd say," he said. Grace blinked. He nodded toward the folder. "That was never meant to be the gift, just the seed. What you do with it, whether you take it, plant it, or burn it, is yours." The choice had to be. She exhaled, shoulders releasing tension she hadn't realized she carried. "I want to start small," she said. "A space that doesn't carry a name. Just a message. You belong here. No titles, no expectations." Henry raised his tea in salute. "Then that's exactly what it should be." And in that quiet moment, between steam and raindrops, Grace realized the true power of what she'd been offered. Not money, not recognition, but trust. 6 months later, the rain returned. It wasn't Tokyo this time. It was home. Or a soft, persistent drizzle sweeping across cracked sidewalks and flickering streetlights, familiar, gray, and somehow comforting. But the corner of Fifth and Mercer looked different now. The boarded-up laundromat that had sat empty for years had been reborn. Soft yellow light glowing from behind clean windows, the scent of fresh pastries drifting out with each swing of the door. The new sign above read simply, "The First Cup." Inside, mismatched chairs surrounded polished wooden tables. Bookshelves lined the walls. A chalkboard behind the counter didn't list prices. Instead, it read, "Your first cup is on us. Your second, if you can, is for someone else." Grace stood behind the counter, apron tied, hands steady. Her hair was pulled back into a loose ponytail, and her eyes scanned the room, not with anxiety, but peace. Her brother Eli sat near the window, laughing with a local artist they'd hired to paint the mural on the back wall. Community, family, kindness, brushed in colors that made the whole place feel alive. And then, just like before, the door opened. A man entered, older, wet from the rain. His hands trembled slightly as he removed his cap. He stood near the door, hesitant. A young barista, a new hire named Avery, approached him, unsure. "Sir, we're open, but—" Grace was already walking toward them, a smile playing at her lips. "It's okay," she said gently, placing a hand on Avery's shoulder. She turned to the man. "Would you like a warm seat by the window?" The man nodded gratefully, and Grace led him over. "And what would you like today?" she asked. He hesitated. "Just something warm. It's been a long morning." Grace smiled. "Then let's make it a little longer. With peace." She brought him a cup of fresh coffee, setting it down carefully. "The first one's always on us," she said. "No questions, no shame." The man's eyes welled briefly, and Grace gave him the same quiet nod she once gave a stranger in a soaked coat, trembling at the counter. As she turned back toward the bar, something in the window caught her eye. Across the street, beneath a black umbrella, stood Henry. He didn't wave. He didn't smile. He just watched, coat collar turned up, eyes soft. And then he nodded, once, slow, and vanished into the rain. No grand farewell, no parting words, Just the quiet understanding between two people who had changed one another's lives, not with wealth or plans or promises, but with presence. The cafe was full, every chair taken, every table surrounded by quiet laughter, steaming cups, and the hum of a community that had found a home. Grace stood near the piano, with a microphone in one hand and a warm cup in the other. She looked out at the room, not as a waitress, not as a worker, but as a woman who had chosen to show up. She cleared her throat, then smiled. A few months ago, I paid for a man's coffee. That's all. $5. I didn't know who he was. I didn't care. He looked tired. He looked invisible. And I just couldn't look away. The room quieted, the clinking of cups slowing. That cup didn't change his life, but it changed mine. Because for the first time, someone saw the act, not as a transaction, but as truth. This cafe, the first cup, isn't about coffee. It's about presence, about what happens when we see each other, not for what we have or don't have, but for who we are. She glanced at the chalkboard behind her, then back at the crowd. Some loves don't need romance. Some lives change not with miracles, but with one small gesture and the courage to mean it. She raised her cup. So here's to showing up, one cup at a time. The crowd applauded, soft, respectful, moved, and somewhere in the back a first cup was being poured for someone who didn't know they needed it, until they did. In a world that often feels too fast, too loud, and too divided, maybe the greatest act of rebellion is kindness. Grace didn't have power, prestige, or wealth. What she had was presence. She chose compassion over convenience, dignity over judgment. And in doing so, she reminded us all of something we tend to forget. Kindness isn't weakness. It's strength in its purest form. Think about it. How many people do we pass each day who are just one gesture away from feeling seen? Maybe it's the man quietly eating alone. Maybe it's the single mother in line at the pharmacy. Maybe it's the version of ourselves we've forgotten to care for. This story isn't just about Grace. It's about us. So tell us in the comments, have you ever done something small that meant something big to someone else? Or has someone's quiet act of kindness changed your life in a way they never knew? We'd love to hear your stories, and we know others will too. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like. Share it with someone who needs a little hope today. And don't forget to subscribe to Warm Soul Stories for more true-to-life tales that remind us who we are and who we can be. Thank you for spending this time with us. And remember, you never know whose life you're changing just by showing up.